we're going to take this next hour and do it a little bit differently than some of the panels that have been running all day today. So we're going to kind of, as you can see on the title there, from vision to practice, role of GenAI in a learning health system. So what we decided to do as part of this event today was to actually roll out a GenAI tool to our physicians. We call it Chatty EHR. And so as we spoke this morning, the email has gone out. We're looking at our logs, sweating a little bit, making sure that everyone is on board with this tool we just rolled out, which allows our clinicians to use language models with their patients' medical records. But what we thought we'd do today is give you a little bit of a taste of what exactly we did, talk about what a learning health system is, and then kind of zoom in and zoom out through a panel discussion of what it means to use GenAI in a learning health system. So before I go there, though, I think we should tell you a little bit about Stanford Healthcare and what a learning health system actually is. So I'm going to ask Topher to come up. He's our Chief Medical Informatics Officer, to tell you a little bit about that.
Thanks so much, Nikesh. Hello, everyone. Afternoon. My name is Topher Sharp. I'm a practicing internist, so I'm a doctor in the crowd. I am also our Chief Medical Information Officer, and sometimes I'm asked what that means. That does mean that I'm a doctor on the technology team at our hospital. It also means that I'm closer to a technologist on our doctors team, on our medical team at our hospital. I wanted to set the stage for this, okay? We are all patients at some point in our lives and our journeys. And for each of us, the question will be, when we need care, what that experience will look like. So at Stanford Healthcare, we come at this as an academic medical center. We're right here on the campus, so we're infused in what it means to be in Silicon Valley, and we have the tripartite mission of all academic medical centers of delivering excellent care, of teaching the next generation, and also of discovering new ways of care and bringing those into the environment of care. This is something that we think we are uniquely but not solely positioned to do, but it's a very important aspect of what care means in the modern era, and certainly one that needs to be replicated more and more as we have more rapidly advancing technologies and much, much more evidence basis around which we try to provide best practice. We're a part of the university. We're partners with our sister hospital. We have multiple hospitals, multiple clinics, many providers, other things that you see here. But I guess what I really wanted to spend a little more time thinking with you about is this idea about how a healthcare organization practices. What is the flywheel that allows that healthcare organization to continually develop and improve? And in 2006, the National Academy of Medicine came forward with this concept of a learning health system, because we know that historically, when new information or new science is generated, there's a substantial gap between that generated knowledge and when it actually is applied and applied at scale. In fact, believe it or not, that gap is upward of 10 to 15 years from the time of insight to the gathering of evidence, to the dissemination of that evidence, to the change in practice, to the change in outcomes that we'd like to see in our country or in our organization. So the question of the learning health system is, can you engage in that process locally and beyond in a way that is happening much more quickly and much more iteratively? And so the learning health system is really all about an integrated approach where you take the lessons that are learned as the care is delivered, which then can derive insights back into the science of care, showing further the evidence that those actually accrue benefit, and then once again spin the wheel around. Well, this only works when you have the ability for data-driven decision-making, right? Because what all of this circle rides on is data that actually traverses this arc and brings you back into the opportunity to change the practice. So this means we need to have things like interoperable data systems, good data governance and ethical approaches to how we manage this, collaboration across those disciplines, and investment in this activity and technology, and ultimately a culture of learning that says we really need to go out and seek new opportunities and really understand what those best practices can be. So I hope that that'll give you a little bit of flavor for where we think this becomes an accelerated process when we start to bring AI into the picture that allows us to turn this wheel even faster as we go forward.
In addition to getting the privilege of moderating this panel, my name is Nikesh Kotecha. I head the data science efforts here at Stanford Healthcare. So we're going to show you about a 3-minute video on something we call Chatty EHR. And again, for the techs in the room, you might think it's pretty obvious, it's easy, but I guarantee you in the back end, there was a lot of things we had to kind of think through, both from a governance standpoint, but also from a technology standpoint to kind of make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video now, please.
We are launching something big at Stanford Medicine. Chat EHR lets our staff securely interact with patient records in plain language. This is one step in our journey as a learning health system, using technology not just to deliver care, but to continuously learn and improve. Our story began in late 2023 with SecureGPT, a HIPAA-compliant platform for language models. That foundation opened the door. Automations, pilots, and eventually embedding language models directly inside Epic. It wasn't a straight line. We built the first in world Epic integration, tested automations to ease referrals and transfers, and built MedHelm, an evaluation framework informed by top uses in a health system. This milestone reflects 2 years of hard work, engineering, governance, and close partnership across our clinical, nursing, data science, and technical teams. Our staff are already putting Chatty EHR to work. We heard from hematopathology, patient safety, cardiology, case management, and dermatology. Across specialties and roles, the message is the same. It's not perfect, but it saves time, it surfaces insights, and it helps us care for patients better. And that's exactly the point. Chat EHR is valuable today, while still giving us space to learn, refine, and improve. This launch is not the finish line. We're committed to responsible AI with continuous evaluation, monitoring, and feedback. Chat EHR is part of a larger innovation ecosystem at Stanford Medicine. It reflects our commitment to continuous learning, improvement, and care transformation together.
Not quite read AI in the beginning, but try to do a little bit of AI in there too, in the spirit of the conference. So now that you have a sense of what Chatty EHR is, some of the work we've done there, I'm going to turn it over to Nigam so he can tell us a little bit about how we think about responsible AI in a learning health system, and then we'll move to our panel discussion.
There's a couple of themes we touched on. Topher introduced us to the learning health system and the idea that we want to continuously improve what we're doing. Nikesh showed you one example of one item, one tool that we've built that allow us to use this catnip of a technology called GenAI in our daily care cycle. So it takes 10, 15 years to get something in practice, and then we gave you one example. And so now I'm going to try to bridge that gap in the 10, 15 minutes that I have. So first of all, how many of you here are primarily technologists? Doctors, other than Topher? 1, 2, all right, I could probably get away with a lot of stuff today. I am a medical doctor, I don't see patients. take a best guess at how many IT systems do we in hospital IT run? There's a number of applications. 820, all right. Anybody else? 20, all right. We've got a big range. 100? 50? 1,000? Right? 1,000? Going once? Going twice? All right, we'll settle for, there was a hand up back there. 1,600, that's actually closer to the truth. 1,544 as of this morning. That is the number of applications that we run in our configuration management database. Now, not all of them are, Microsoft Word also counts, so we'll strike that one out. But there's like, I don't know, 600, 700 real systems. That means 700 vendors. That means 700 people who want to try to tell us how we should be using AI to drive healthcare. And do you know what our core business is? It's AI. It's healthcare. It's not AI, right? But from Salesforce to Epic to Microsoft to Workday to like every startup, I bet a few of you are startup entrepreneurs here. Everybody wants us. AI is our core business, whereas our core business is healthcare. Okay, so just park that for a second. 1,544 applications. So it's pandemonium, right? How do we be responsible in that? The second sort of big thing is people say healthcare is risk averse. You've probably heard that a couple of times. We're amongst the few industries that take a live human being, knock them unconscious, open their body, put a new heart in it, and close them up and then wake them and send home in 2 days. That is the very definition of doing risky stuff. Okay, so we're not risk averse when it comes to delivering healthcare. We invent stuff like that. Stanford Healthcare invented the heart transplant. But we are risk averse in trying out all the gizmo that, or whatever idea that an innovator has, people running those 600, 700 IT systems and say, can you please try this? It's like, no, my core business is the patients, the 2 million outpatient visits and the admissions and the 601 beds and the 101 ICU beds. I don't want to try out your random stuff. All right, but there's this AI thing, and it's going to change everything, right? It's supposed to save money. There's going to be like immense growth in productivity. So like, how do we reconcile all of that? That's where this whole idea of being responsible comes in. Obviously, nobody wants to be irresponsible. But given this mess, we have to be very intentional in what is it that we're going to focus on. So in the video, Nikesh showed you a little sort of graph or chart, flow chart flashed by. I don't expect you to remember it. That is sort of our North Star on how do we keep sanity in all of this. On the one hand, we have massive innovation going on. On the one hand, on the other hand, we're regulated industry, and our core business is not AI, but we do want to use AI to shorten the time span of learning from 15 years to something smaller. So how do we get there? So what we landed on is that we need some rules of engagement amongst the 4 or 5 primary constituents. Constituent 1 is our frontline people. The number up there was about 15,000, but 3,000, 1,100 or so doctors, 3,200 nurses, 1,486 fellows. Residents and fellows. For all of these people, they're the ones at the front line receiving a new idea or coming up with a new idea. When they have something, they go to our IT staff. Our division is called Technology and Digital Solutions. Makes for a wonderful acronym. TDS, come on guys, sleeping. There's 1,000 people in IT. And they are the ones who have to decide what are we going to follow up on and what are we going to not follow up on. And you don't want to be the person who says no all the time. So we come up with a process to ask all of these good ideas. There's a data science team that Nikesh is involved in running. He's our head of data science. There's a medical informatics team that Topher Sharp runs. There's a nursing informatics team run by Gretchen Brown, who's not here. And then long story short, we assess everything and come up with a report that goes to governance saying, how many people will be affected? How much is it going to cost? Can we sustain this long term? And do we have the work capacity to do what we need to do? And is it ethical? We answer these questions, and then it's basically the C-suite's job to say yes or no. And if it's a no, it comes from the CEO's office by a committee that's chaired by Topher Sharp and the CEO. That's how we try to remain responsible and have some sanity in what is going on. The other part that we need to be responsible in is, as we deploy things, are they good, bad, or ugly? How do we know? So I'll close with a anecdote related to this Chatty EHR thing and MedHelm that was mentioned. So MedHelm stands for Holistic Evaluation of Language Models in Medicine. Some of you might have heard about the work from Percy Liang and the Center for Research and Foundation Models. The crux of the idea is that for any given task, we want to define the medical record or a portion of it on which it will run. We want to define the exact prompt that is going to accomplish the task. We want to define what's the right response or the criteria of what is a good response. And we want a metric by which we can adjudicate a model-generated response as is it good, bad, or ugly. Got those through four things, we get holistic evaluation of language models. But in a case like Chatty EHR, where it's open-ended, how do we know what they're going to use it for? So in the first pass, what we do is we make sure that basic stuff like what's the rate of hallucinations? It's less than 4%, we checked. After that, we're looking at the prompts as the users use them, classifying them into the task they're trying to accomplish using a taxonomy of about 120 tasks that we came up with. And then given that task, there are certain tasks where all the feedback that's needed is thumbs up, thumbs down, like did the response work or didn't work? There are other tasks where we might need to ask and say, what was wrong with it? What was good with it? What was bad with it? And there are others for which we might need to create a prospective benchmark, like summarization, for example. If you use this thing to create a chart summary, how do you know it's correct? You can ask the user, and they'll give you their impression. But some of you probably know about things like fact decomposition and verification, where we can take that summary, break it up into individual facts, and then for every fact ask, is it backed up by the rest of the EHR? But if I do that, one API call to get a summary fires off another 150 calls, which is like my cloud vendors would love it because every call is $1 for them. But that's not very responsible. So how do we come up with better ways to do those evals and monitoring is something we spend a lot of time on. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a flavor of the multiple dimensions of being responsible. We can't work with all 600 vendors. There's only 1,000 of us total. And this goes from people doing desktop support and ITs and like picking up the phone to people running our cloud backend and everything. And then of the things we want to work on, we want to make sure that they accelerate the transition from, yes, we know something, to, yes, it's working in practice, the learning health system. And at the same time, we want to do this in a sustainable manner. Because last I checked, we were trying to reduce the cost of healthcare with technology. And we can't afford to increase it just by trying out stuff. So that's sort of the perspective with which we come. I'm going to invite all of my colleagues back on stage. We have Nikesh, head of data science, Topher Sharp, CMIO, and Christian Lindmark, who's our chief technology officer. He basically makes sure that all of these API calls that I fire off go to Jared, who's along with him, who makes sure that they actually respond something instead of an error. And then Anurang Revri, who's been conspiring with John to make all of this happen and get this event going. And he's also our chief enterprise architect. So we'll all gather up, pick some random seats, and off we go.
Again, we've come up with two different frameworks we've given you, right? So as you think about a learning health system, the traditional way you think about this is it's a 10-year process to get something you've learned into clinical practice. How do we make that faster? We're now doing it in 2. We also talked a little bit about, hey, what we're putting out there isn't going to be perfect, but how do we learn? How do we kind of bring that, and what do we do from a data-driven perspective? So Christian, I'm going to start with you. When you think about GenAI and learning health systems, what do you need to kind of have in place from a technology perspective? What building blocks do you need to think about and have and enable for the organization?
Yeah, Nikesh, thank you. Yeah, you heard Dr. Sharp talk earlier about a learning health system and the fact that we're trying to And we get data at every patient interaction, but it takes a long time often to get that data back into the workflows to improve patient care and patient outcomes. And so obviously at the advent of ChatGPT, take yourself back to 2023. GPT was announced in the winter of 22. The fastest downloaded app ever, really became mainstream really quickly. And we soon realized that our faculty, our doctors, and our staff are going to start using this tool. And while they know they're not supposed to use any tools outside of our environment with patient data or other privileged data, we have a lot of researchers at Stanford that are very interested in creating the next new thing, as Niga mentioned. And so we had to find a way to real quickly give them a safe, secure environment to do the work that they want to do to enable us to continue in that learning healthcare system mode. And so my boss, Mike Pfeffer, came to me and he said, Christian, we need to create a secure ChatGPT environment for our staff to use. And I said, okay, great, we can do that. And he goes, how long? And I pinged Jared over here, and Jared said, I need 6 months. Because as you heard earlier, healthcare, we don't move fast. We tend to move slow. We move by consensus. This takes a long time to get decisions made. My boss said to me, you have 6 weeks. And I called Jared. I said, Jared, we're doing this. You have 6 weeks. And he said, there's no way. But we've got the leadership to support us and say, this is your number one priority. Nothing else matters. Create this environment. We need this for our staff to be able to have a secure environment. And so that was the whole impetus for what we called Secure GPT. And we put a big beta behind it as well when we released it, because we built this without any additional staff or additional resources. And so we had to make sure that the expectations were set that this was a beta product. Obviously, we wanted it to be used with patient data for those that want to use it, but it was not meant, people need to realize it was not production standard. So if things were to break, it may not be ready for a certain amount of time. We just didn't have the staff to support it. The other critical part about what we built is, obviously in ChatGPT, anytime you put data into it, right, it's training the model, it's potentially discoverable to the population if they run a query as well. So not only did we have to create this model where it's safe within the Stanford healthcare tenant, but it also had to make sure that every individual user, when they put their data in, that data did not train the model and was not accessible to anyone else. Because if I'm a physician and I'm working with a patient and I want to put that patient's chart or information into Secure GPT and run some queries on it, I can't have another physician or another user of that Secure GPT also go in and query it and somehow find that same information. So that was the whole impetus behind what we built and the timeline that we had to build it in. And when we looked at what we were going to do, we actually sat down with our 3 major cloud providers that we work with. And we have a long history with most all of them. And we tried to figure out who's going to be the best partner to help us achieve this. And we went through that, and we came out with one partner who we thought would really help us get there the fastest and the quickest. And that was, I think, a big part of our success, is that we could take our teams to meet with them. This was a first in the world invention for them as well. We sat with them. They'd never done this either. And Jared can probably tell you in more detail, the way that we ended up building this out the first time back in January of 2024 when we released it, you would not build it the same way today. There are much easier tools available today to build that. But at the time, we were creating this right alongside Microsoft for the first time to create this secure GPT environment. And it's been incredible. It's been a big success. And I'll have Jared talk a little bit about the whys, or Nikesh, if you're going to jump into.
So kind of transitioning to Jared. So you got the why. You said 6 months. They gave you 6 weeks. So how did you do it, Jared? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
In my defense, on the 6 months, I was operating under our normal approach. Again, a little bit risk averse in healthcare. But I think the biggest first step was mind shift for us, and that is just the notion of simply putting beta on an application that we're going to give to our users. Sounds really simple by today's standards, but that's really a first in healthcare. And that was a big help to us. Mike Pfeffer, Dr. Pfeffer, our CIO, giving us that runway to get that thing out there. I think the second piece that was really important to us are the solution accelerators that are available. Again, our partner worked very closely with us, Microsoft. They create these things. They have all the underlying infrastructure and things that we might want to use, and it's to showcase those capabilities, but given our time frame, we just grabbed one of those and ran with it and started iterating on that. So I think the next big step for us was a healthy development life cycle, and we got into that, and we decided early on we wanted to do a weekly release, which is kind of aggressive. But again, we felt like we were behind, we were under the gun. That's November of 2023. We're still doing weekly releases. We have kept that up for the most part, with very few exceptions. I mean, you guys are all watching the news. You're seeing how many new models are released, and as soon as there's a new model out, that's the first question. When can I get that? Is it ready yet? It's Nigham's asking.
We're the first one to deploy DeepSeek in the US. We have 18 different models running, thanks to Jared.
Yeah, yes, there's 18 models available on that thing today, which is a little bit different than normal. Again, there's better ways to build these today. I think we've evolved the platform through those builds, using new technologies, trying to stay on the edge. And I think the next piece is, this will sound basic as well, listen to the users. There's a few places on our application where you can give feedback to us, and we look at that stuff live. There are lots of other avenues people take. Hey, who does the secure GPT stuff? Comes through different people on the team. We take all of that in, and we try to give as many of those features as possible. And I think the last thing I'd share that we learned through this was really like the research teams. I think the first question we got when we released this: when can I get API access? They don't even want to get into the portal. They want their own application hitting this thing, doing their experiments, research, whatever. So that's grown. I think we're probably somewhere around 70 research teams we support with this thing, and they beat on it much, much harder than anyone else in the enterprise. But it's very exciting to provide that.
I think the other thing I'd point out too is that the other thing that we have access to is we actually have access to all the prompts and queries that are taking place. And this has been extremely valuable, and you were probably going to say something on that, Jared, right? But I think so. What we've been able to do is we've been able to look at those prompts and queries and see what people are doing and look for some commonality. And then we can actually reach out, and we started to build tools that can actually address those needs. So they no longer become a query anymore. Actually, now we're talking a little more about agentic AI. So we're actually creating these agents now, and things actually solve these problems, as opposed to individuals continue to have to run these same prompts over and over.
Yeah, it was a great catch. I missed that. But yes, we do package those prompts up from time to time. It's been a while, but we've done those, and the data science team will do some analysis on that, see if there's any patterns or anything in there. Are there products or things that we need to develop to get those answers to people?
So I think it's worth tying back to Chatty EHR. When we looked at these prompts, what are people doing? There was a slide that flashed by in the video with that bar chart. The top 5 uses that people wanted to do required them to copy paste the EHR into the box and then issue their prompt, meaning they needed the EHR in context. Well, if that's the top 5 uses, we got to build something where the EHR is already in context, which is how the idea of Chatty EHR came around.
Yeah, that's
I
great.
can provide a contrast as well, because at that time, my colleagues all around the country were asking the same question, which is, did your hospital block the website for you to actually access ChatGPT? Because they blocked mine, and it's killing me, right? I want to be able to interact with sensitive data, because that is actually what I do every single day, is interact with sensitive data, but I want to derive insights that matter to me. So this was an incredible boon for us to be able to do so.
And this led all to many different things kind of coming together, right? So all of a sudden, Anurang, you had at your door some infrastructure, you had some top users, you needed to put it into the EHR. As the chief enterprise architect, where you have integration, you have data science, you have architecture underneath you, how did you start thinking about this? What are some things you went through, and talk us through that journey?
Yeah, so thanks. Just continuing on the journey, after we've got a good infrastructure, we've got a set of APIs. We also have learning, right, from Secure GPT as to what people are doing. And we were actually doing our own boutique kind of experiments with a few departments as to how to build applications. And we started to see repeatable patterns here, right, that we will need some kind of a platform to be able to execute this GPT capability in a secure way, right? And that's kind of what, we came up with the idea of Chatty EHR. And the other thing is, I just want to touch on one thing around the learning system. So it's not just The people that are learning, our mode of how we are delivering solutions, our solutions are also learning, right? So all the AI solutions are learning solutions, right? So, which means that you're not going to follow your traditional way of doing software development where you've got requirements and design and development and full-blown testing and you do a release, right? That's now gone out the window with the AI solutions, right? People are actually trying things, learning, the system is learning. So that's partly why we built this platform to accelerate our application development. So if you want to move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what we actually built, right? So as an architect, you need an architecture diagram, actually, right? So essentially what we've got is, we've got a bunch of data sources, and these data sources keep growing, right? Epic being one of the main ones where all our electronic medical records are. But we have a lot of other data in different sources that we need to bring together. And some of this data is what people were cutting and pasting into secure GPT, right? So that's sort of one part of it. On the right side is essentially the LLMs, which are eventually going to do the GenAI task for you. But in the middle is where we actually build the context for the LLM using the prompt that the user wants to execute, as well as the data. So we have to bring all that stuff together. And we've built two sets of applications, essentially, right? One is what you see on the top, which is the open-ended exploration, Chatty EHR, what we are calling. This is embedded in the patient context within Epic, so people can have open-ended queries, use it for explorations, or doing specific tasks day to day, right? Like summarization was one thing that was mentioned, or searching for something, in the patient history. And the data that we get is not just for the data of the patient generated within Stanford, but also what I think Epic calls Care Everywhere, which is the patient's data that's imported from other health systems or other places that they can take. They have been actually provided care delivery, right? Because most people get care in multiple medical locations, actually, right? So that was the Chatty EHR screen that you guys have been seeing. But we believe that the value will be in a lot of these repeat tasks, doing on a multiple set of patients, like, for example, summarizing referral patients, or dealing with registries, or the tumor boards where we have to summarize patients' information so the tumor board can actually review them. Those are the automations that you see in the bottom that we are starting to build out, actually. We already have about 4 or 5 live. By the end of the year, we'll have about a dozen of these running, and we're sort of starting to keep track of them. We're starting to actually measure the value of this. That's been, that's become our mandate, which is, are we getting some value out of this in terms of dollars, in terms of quality, in terms of patient experience, and those kinds of things, right? So that's essentially what we built, in version 1. There are many features that people keep asking for, and we'll keep enhancing them. The other benefit that we got from this was, this is now, the bottom automation is the way we are actually starting to integrate vendor solutions, right? So, like, I think what Christian mentioned, we don't want our patient data to leave, our enclave, actually, right? And we want it to stay within that. And that's kind of how we want the vendors, and this is something for innovators to take the node. We want the AI to come to our data. In the old ways, it was, the vendors would say, give us all your data, we'll train it on model, and we'll give you a solution. We're not going to do that, actually, right? So we're going to bring the AI as an API into our environment, execute on it, and deliver the results to wherever is appropriate for the user.
So let me build on that a little bit. Stanford's a small hospital in the grand scheme of things. But even a place like this, we have 123 different species or types of clinicians. That's the number of specialties and subspecialties we have, 123. Across our 601 beds and 100 ICU beds and our clinics, that's the number of user personas. That's the minimum number. Now, a rheumatologist in an outpatient setting versus a rheumatologist doing an inpatient consult, they have very different information needs. So if you overlay the site of practice, we're probably talking 500, maybe 800, maybe 1,000 different user personas. And each persona has, let's say, 10 information needs. So we're talking 5,000 different market segments that are role, time, and place dependent. So how do you enable rapid innovation in such an environment? The only way is to have a platform, an environment like this, where we can bring innovation in. Like, we're not going to be shipping stuff out, because it's near impossible to keep track of who has what then.
That's great. And that takes us into at least one of the personas. So Topher, maybe speak specifically about you as a clinician. What do you think about GenAI? What's going on? How are you thinking about these tools? And then we'll go broader with the learning health system.
Well, speaking as a persona of one, I'll start by saying that I was practicing at a time when we had paper charts. So this ability to synthesize data and be able to work with data is very, very different. And when you think of personas and data needs, there was a time when I would be using paper charts. The paper chart was not available, and so my only source of data was the patient in front of me. Now that created a wonderful environment for interpersonal relation, but it didn't help me answer the questions that I really needed. And I would say that cascaded forward with electronic medical records, which are really a repository framework, not an interoperable way of surfacing information that I need when I need it. So, a common clinician activity is to do something like pull up a patient's chart before they've come in for their care and spend significant time rifling through all of the little pockets and cubby holes where all of the important data might be, all of which is predicated on knowing how to find it, where to go look, and how to engage in that data mapping or that data set or that interface. So as soon as AI and generative AI became available, it was really very obvious to our physicians and our clinicians that this would be a massive win if we could actually use it in the context of direct care. And that includes things like being able to find important information that is otherwise so very difficult to be able to draw back from the chart. So being able to ask a patient, being able to ask a question like, has this patient ever received a drug of this type? Say, an anticoagulant. Did they ever receive something that thinned their blood? That seems like a pretty straightforward question, but that could be a half an hour of digging through medical records, even in an electronic environment, to try to answer that question. So for clinicians, the opportunity to use such a technology to augment their search, and then also to summarize care, giving a launch point to say, here is the gestalt of what has happened to date. This is actually a real art. In hospital medicine, we have people like orthopedists who are fantastic with bones, but basically never look in the chart. And then we have infectious disease doctors who sometimes we almost call just to say, what happened here? Right? Tell me what actually happened to this patient, because they will fastidiously review all of the encounters, all of the kind of components that have made up the progression of a patient's journey. Well, in the end, that summarization is something that we all value tremendously because it cognitively gives us a place to start as we go engage with the patient. And the last is really about kind of classifying data. So being able to pull quickly forward and say, tell me about the various times this patient experienced a blood thinner. Put those in a chronological order for me. Help me understand these categories of what those interactions might be. These were all sort of impossible tasks prior to the advent of GenAI. So the creation of a platform that allows us to engage directly around those types of questions and answers is incredibly valuable. And I'd say one more thing that I think clinicians struggle with as well, which is clinicians struggle with administrative overhead in their experience as clinicians. So the barrier between clinicians and the time that they spend with patients is in part just being able to move those things out of the way. So the opportunity to, for instance, say, summarize what has happened here. And if I like that summary, that could actually be a reasonable documentation with my validation of the care that I delivered or that was delivered to the patient. That's a tremendous asset. So I guess it created a real hunger here because many of the tools that we put in front of our clinicians, they aren't thoroughly overwhelmed to have. A new way of billing, a new way of ordering, a new process of authorization. These are not things that our clinicians go asking us for, but a new way of drawing insights out of a chart, that's a real gift.
That's great. So kind of a follow-up to that, as you're seeing this, right, maybe, and we think about the learning health system component of all of this, like, what do you think needs to be in place beyond having this new way of doing things, get our clinicians on board? Do you think, are we seeing that happen? Do you think there's more we need to do? Again, as technologists, we'll come up with even more ways of doing things. But what are you seeing out there in terms of how clinicians want to take this and thinking about it?
Okay, well, I'll put it in maybe three buckets, I think. The first is, if there's a user interaction component to this that is always tremendously important in everything that we do. And it's very common that a wonderful commodity experience gets really changed when it becomes enterprise hardened. So I would say that part of this is the wonderful interaction around a generative AI platform is something that our users really appreciate because you don't have to know the language to be able to interact and pull the insights forward. So there are aspects of that I hope we'll see continue to become even more facile. Like if it knows me and the kinds of questions I typically ask as opposed to the general persona of some clinician who wants to ask a question. And I think those types of things we're hearing quite frequently, like how can I save away my types of queries and questions? How can I get those back in the format that is most amenable to my need? Those types of things. The second one I would say is
on the board already.
Good.
User preferences.
These aren't really rocket science per se, but they make a tremendous difference. The second I would say is the ability to validate data in an interactive fashion. So when you use these systems, they're not deterministic, and they come up with a best representation of what they see. So here's my story. I went in to see one of my patients one morning before I walked into the hospital room. I looked up and said, what happened overnight? And I used a generative AI tool to tell me, summarize what happened overnight. And it said, the patient received their embolization procedure and the patient did well. I said, oh, this is so great. I was so happy. I didn't know if they were going to get that done. I walked in the room. I said to the patient's daughter, I said, I understand that your mother had the embolization procedure. How did it go? She said, we never got our embolization procedure. We waited until 8 o'clock at night. We couldn't eat all day. And finally, it never happened. Where did you get that information from? Well, of course, it turns out that in every note, it said, embolization today. Embolization will happen today. And so our GPT analyzed those notes and said, well, certainly yesterday there must have been an embolization because every single note says embolization today. So I think that being able to kind of quickly understand and the tools that allow you to better understand when these data are truly correct, when they're directional, or when they're, what is their source, how those work. In medicine, that was a simple mistake and not an injurious one, but there could be others that would be much more so. And the last, since you're asking for my wish list, I will say that the last element here is to really expand the data pool. So this would involve multimodal data. This would involve OCR-based data that we would pull down out of the many faxes, because medicine is one of the last bastions of faxing. And we still have a lot of data that becomes locked away in inaccessible places, even to the best tools. Our clinicians, I think if you ever have the experience of watching a clinician work, you'll watch them switching screens, switching modalities, switching directions, literally swiveling back and forth in order to be able to pull all this data into their thinking. And so that's a big opportunity for us, I think, as we go forward as an industry, is to be able to interpret not only what we happen to have in the most codified set of data, but extending into those other data sets that we all really care about.
So I'm going to go to Nigam. Go ahead, Nigam.
So this is a wonderful sort of summary of what a doctor wants. And as innovators, think about how you would solve this. So let's just work at the first example. It takes 30 minutes of pecking around in all of those cubicles and shoe boxes to find all the data that you need. Now, if you solve that as an innovator, like that's a great help to the physician, but you haven't innovated yet. You've just paid off technical debt. A doctor should not have had to spend 30 minutes pecking around. And so when you do your ROI calculations and how we're benefiting the health system, that's just paying off debt. Paying off debt is not new revenue. So just think about that as technologists. When you think about helping health systems, removing things that shouldn't have been there in the first place, that's a great place to start. That's not true innovation. That's just paying off bad debt from prior innovation that didn't succeed.
That's great. So maybe we'll take a little bit of a different tact and then come back to this question. As we've been rolling this out, we talked a little bit about evaluation. What are you seeing out there for evaluation? What would you like these innovators to solve as we think about evaluation for our health system, but really broadly, what's going on in the field? What is out there? What do you think would be useful for us to be able to kind of take in?
I think evaluation right now is, to put it mildly, a high variance activity. There are people who would look at one output and say, yep, looks good, let's ship it. And then there are others who would look at 1,000 outputs, manually annotate and mark up everything, and it has a one error and therefore not good to use. We see the full spectrum. And so I think the key is to achieve balance. There are certain things you can't afford a mistake. If for the search that Topher gave the example of, was the patient on an anticoagulant? You can't afford to get that wrong. Somebody could die. Allergy, same thing. Somebody could die. You can't afford to get that wrong. Other areas where you could afford to miss a piece of information, and it's not the end of the world. And so I think a risk-based approach, what are the non-negotiables? What do we cannot afford to get wrong? Start there. Those need the highest level of rigor. Human review, fact decomposition, truth sets. And then for others, we can start backing off and say, for this one, we're going to do with thumbs up, thumbs down, or just human feedback. And for others, we might just have an automated test that we run. I think we haven't fully figured out as a community, partnership between health systems and technologists and computer scientists and so on, that how do we organize ourselves so that we can get to such risk-based evaluation so that we're not holding technology back for 10 years.
So Christian, as a CTO, we were talking this morning, and a year in AI time is 10 years of progress, or even more, right? So tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about these, as the speed of these technologies are going, what we have to do from an enterprise perspective. How are we thinking through that? Give us a little bit of insight as to what's going on there.
Yeah, so Nikesh, it's a really good question. Technology is obviously moving extremely fast. I would say, I think one of the most important things that we have in place at Stanford Healthcare is the team that we're working on. It's no coincidence that the 6 of us are up here today giving this presentation. It's because of the collegiality that we have amongst ourselves, the working relationships that we have amongst ourselves, and the trust that we put in one another. And that doesn't happen. You can't do great things unless you have that. So I think for us, as having this team, having these perspectives is incredibly valuable. I think we've got to continue to train our staff. So I think AI training is extremely important. So one of the things we've done at Stanford Healthcare is we created an AI training class for all of TDS, the IT department, and it was a mandatory class, AI Training 101. We made it available to the entire organization as well. So anyone in Stanford Healthcare was welcome to take that class. And then we created an AI 201 class that we made mandatory for managers and above within IT. I think it's critically important that people understand what AI can mean to their daily workflows and how it works. When we rolled out SecureGPT and got it into the environment, a lot of the feedback we got, people would say, your LLM's wrong. Your Stanford model's wrong. And we're like, well, it's not our LLM. It's OpenAI's, it's not ours. We're just using OpenAI's model. But they're like, it's wrong. We asked it who the president of Stanford Healthcare was, and it gave us the name of the old president. It's like, well, You're using AI as search. That's not what it's for, right? Like we had to teach people how to prompt it, how to query, and what it was actually for. So I think as we're going to continue to look at AI opportunities, we have to bring our staff skill set up, and everyone's got to make AI part of their jobs and look for opportunities to take advantage of the technology to make it better. I think the other thing is, the saying you can go fast, and you can, or I had this all planned. It'd be like George W. Bush. Okay, so.
Go fast, go alone.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Okay, got it. There we go. Perfect. I think for us, when we deployed SecureGPT, we went fast and we went alone. Jared's like, I got 6 weeks. He goes, I don't have time to go through all of our normal processes and try to figure all this out. I've got to be able to go fast. But I think he also had the trust of others in the organization to know that he was doing the right things. And then as we got to the point where SecureGPT was deployed, we were able to slow down a little bit and say, okay, now let's bring everybody on board, right? And let's get together so that we can go further. And so I think it's that fine line, I think, with AI you got to look at within your organizations, and as you're looking at new products and how you're deploying them, is like, where do you find that balance between going alone and going together? How fast do you need to get something to market versus how good does it have to be before it goes to market? And I think that's a very fine line to walk. I think we got fortunate. Jared and his team were amazing, and we were able to deliver on that pretty quickly. So I think those are some real key elements.
So Jared, I'm going to come to you. Like, are you thinking differently when you're thinking about building a team, what you're hiring for, how you're training based on what we just heard, or what's going on there? That'd be great to know.
Yeah, it changed our focus on our developers. Prior to SecureGPT, we were really a DevOps shop, largely. Now, it's full stack development. We have to have that. I think every team that thinks in the dev world today has to think about that from back to front. It can't just be one piece anymore. There's too many components. We're moving too quickly.
Got it. So, Anurag, a question to you about value. You mentioned that a little bit in your automations, and it's come up quite a bit in a variety of discussions, right? Value, ROI, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about how we're thinking about value, or how we should be thinking about value in an enterprise for AI and for the work we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to get organized around that, so as you know. But I think at the end of the day, we've got our mission, right? And we've got our operational objectives around quality, quality, cost, and patient experience, right? Those are the things. And of course, sustainability is another one that we have, right? So what we are starting to do now is we're starting to work with our finance and looking at all these AI-driven workflows that we are putting out there. And we were doing this for some other applications, but not quite to the extent that we are. And we are starting to quantify what the total ROI is going to be for some of these automations. I think so far we kind of got a pass from a learning perspective, from getting this far, from doing a lot of POCs. But now as we start to make these things more mission critical, we have to start looking at ROI and the total cost of ownership and running that. I think that discipline we have to develop as an organization, and we are starting to do that. I mean, we have, on a back of a paper napkin, we've sort of done some math, and it seems like some of these things are actually starting to get us value, but we need to make sure that that's validated, actually.